Hi, Hugh Taylor here, coming at you on another Sunday morning with a video on one of my favorite topics, something I get asked about a lot, which is how to reach reporters. How do I reach reporters? That seems to be the question that a lot of people have, and it's also a very misunderstood issue because most people don't really understand how PR works, and why would they? That's why they have people like me. So today I'm going to share with you 3 things you need to know if you want to reach reporters. So just to get started with this topic, with something that may seem a little basic, but it is very broadly misunderstood. To get press coverage, you need to reach reporters. Okay? You actually have to connect with a reporter, and it's not easy, but it is possible. And the 3 things you need to know just in a top level, you got to be relevant, be fascinating, and be appropriate. And here's your bonus. Don't limit yourself to traditional media. There's a lot of people now, podcasters, bloggers, other people who may not be working with an official media outlet, but they are still influential. They have an audience. They can be helpful, and you should treat them like reporters as well. That's my one bonus tip for the day. You need to reach reporters if you want press coverage, because reporters almost never, see, I have a typo here. See, even I have typos. Reporters almost never look at press release distribution feeds. This is a monumentally misunderstood concept, and I blame some of my colleagues in the PR industry who will tell you that by distributing their press release, they will put it in front of reporters who will write articles about you. I'm telling you that almost never happens. It may happen if you're a really big, well-known company like IBM or Apple or something, but generally speaking, reporters, they may look at press release feeds. Once in a while, they respond to them, but usually they just either glance at them or ignore them or whatever. You must make contact with them directly. And I don't mean contact them. If you send an email to a reporter, you haven't made contact with him or her. You have to make contact with them if you want them to write about you or include you in their coverage in whatever way that is. And the thing to remember is they do not want to hear from you. Reporters are not interested in you. In fact, reaching out to reporters annoys them usually, but here's the big but, they need you. Reporters need stories. Reporters need sources. So they are open to hearing from you. They just don't want to hear from you. This is known as ambivalence. This is known as mixed signals. It's frustrating for them, and it's frustrating for us. Everybody has to deal with it. It's just a weird, dysfunctional relationship. That's the reality. So if you want to reach reporters, here's 3 tips. The first is be relevant. Okay? The number one complaint I get from reporters is that my pitch is not relevant to what they are covering. Now, you might wonder, why am I getting the complaint? Well, the answer is this is a mistake that I make quite a lot myself. I think someone's interested in a story, but they're not. Now, one of the reasons is reporters change roles. You know, this can happen. Like last month, they were a food and dining critic. This month, they're a movie critic, right? So I'm reaching out to them with a restaurant, and they're like, I don't do restaurants anymore. That's a kind of a honest mistake. A worse mistake is just to blast out pitches to reporters without really looking at what they cover, and then you're going to mostly just ignore you, but they may be annoyed with you, and it may affect your ability to reach them in the future. Being irrelevant will get you ignored. Now, the question is, how do you find out who's relevant? Now, this may be really obvious. Like, for example, if you're in a small city and there's one newspaper and there's one guy at the newspaper who writes about your thing, that's your guy, right? That's your reporter. Other times it's a little harder. One trick is to look at who's writing about your competitors. This is always interesting. Like if let's say you're a software company and you do a certain kind of software. Well, look at who's writing about your competitors, because that'll tell you the reporters that are interested in your kind of software, at least as long as it's recent. If someone wrote about your competitor 5 years ago, they've probably moved on to something else. The other technique is to use a media database. Like, for example, I use something called the Muckrack system, which is a very thorough, detailed database of reporters. You can really find out who's covering what topic. So, if you work with a publicist like me, then they can find reporters for you, but you can do your own homework. It's surprisingly easy to find contact information for people. And interestingly, reporters often publish their email address. They want you to it's like it's again, this dysfunctional dance. Like they don't want to hear from you, but they're giving you their email address in case you have a story for them. Tip number 2 is be fascinating, okay? And the key to this is thinking about your story from the reporter's perspective and from the audience's perspective. And a simple experiment you can do is if you open up a website like Huffington Post or Daily Beast, what are you looking at? What are you clicking on? Are you clicking on something that's boring? Are you clicking on something that you've read 1,000 times before? No, you're probably clicking on something that interests you, okay? You have to think back. What is your story that's going to be interesting to someone who's reading their publication? You have to hook the reporter with the story they want to hear and a story they want to tell. And that's probably a story they haven't heard before. Okay? And I'll give you an example. I was approached recently by someone who had a very interesting story. It's a person who had been in prison, come out of prison, and really turned their life around and built a big business. It was a very impressive story. But I had to think, I mean, this is my job. Like, what's really interesting here? Okay, it's interesting that this person turned their life around, but that probably isn't a story. I mean, that might be like an interesting story once in a while. There has to be more. And so what I suggested was, and this comes to the third point here, is maybe you're the story. Do you have something to say? You know, maybe you have comments you want to make about prison reform or, you know, parole or whatever the issue is. That's the kind of thing people are reporting on. This person can be a source for a story about parole reform or prison reform or bail reform or any number of topics that reporters write about. And then this person could be a really interesting source, someone who's quoted in an article. So those are the kind of things you have to think about when you're trying to figure out how to be fascinating. Because you might find your story fascinating, but you have to think about it, will the reporter find your story fascinating? Number 3 is be appropriate. Remember, reporters are busy professionals. They expect and deserve courteous professional outreach. Okay, that means not being overly familiar. You don't write to reporters saying, hey, dude, what's up? You know, let's rap. You know, you have to be professional. You have to be reasonable. You can't be like, hey, I never heard from you. What's the matter with you? They don't like excessive follow-ups. I have found I almost never do a follow-up pitch, but once in a while I will send out a follow-up just saying, just this one time, just want to put this back at the top of your inbox, and that's it. Reporters get irritated. I don't blame them. If they're not interested, they haven't gotten back to you, it means they're not interested. Hassling them does not work. It will just make things worse. If you like this video, you can read more about this topic in my free ebook, Stop Being Invisible. It's available at the link below. We can also offer you a special introductory offer for our press release service. Come see us at commsfactory.net. We'd love to work with you.